Chippewa Square, at the intersection of Bull and McDonough Streets in downtown Savannah, Georgia, is a very unassuming place. It's quiet, peaceful. But 30 years ago, it was the exact spot where the world first met a man named Forrest Gump as he waited for a bus and shared his life story with anyone who would listen. And yes, where he would hand out goodies from his box of chocolates. The film Forrest Gump was seen by millions, won 7 Oscars, and introduced audiences to colorful characters that were all made better by Forrest's simplified approach to life.
Something happened here in Chippewa Square. This is right where the Forrest Gump bench was. This is where Tom Hanks was sitting.
You want a chocolate?
And this is kind of where it all started, because if I hadn't have done Forrest Gump... Oh, hello, people. Hello, everyone.
That's Gary Sinise, who portrayed the surly Lieutenant Dan Taylor, walking through the square and being stopped by a busload of fans. In the film, Lieutenant Dan goes from feeling angry about losing his legs in battle to accepting and embracing his life. The film forever changed Gary's career, and more importantly, his ability to help those in need. Gary had grown up with an appreciation for the military, but the film opened up so many more doors for him. He has spent a great deal of the past 30 years assisting veterans through his Gary Sinise Foundation, which has donated millions. But it's also given him a chance to go back to his original passion, music, by playing hundreds of shows with his Lieutenant Dan Band for service members worldwide. In today's episode, our hosts sit down with Gary to discuss his experiences before and after Forrest Gump, his strong devotion to the military over the years, and the recent passing of his son, Mac, after more than 5 years battling cancer. Gary was able to pass on his love of music to Mac, and one of the final things they shared together was the recording of Mac's Arctic Circles, an orchestral piece the young man composed, which serves as the theme music to today's episode. I'm Carrie Varouhekis, and Mama always said, this is Army Matters.
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Yes, That's Right, Army Matters Podcast. I'm your co-host, the 15-star Mid of the Army, Dan Dailey, and I'm here with my good friend,
Lieutenant General Retired Leslie Smith, the 66th Inspector General, which is more than 15. Did you know that, Dan? 66 is more than 15.
I was trying to do the math there, but I can't figure it out.
Yeah, okay. Don't do math in public. We were talking about that.
No, I was trying to do math. So, Les, I know I was going to ask you a question.
What?
Guess where I ate dinner the other night?
Well, you're going to tell me anyway, but I don't appreciate it because you didn't bring me back any. But go ahead, Dan.
Well, let me tell
us
you.
Where you ate.
Bubba Gump Shrimp Factory.
Really? Did you go inside?
Inside.
Or you go to drive-through?
No,
inside.
I sat down, had a Bubba Gump Shrimp Factory meal, sat down.
Really? I feel a certain kind of way, but I guess I'll let you slide.
So, it's been 30 years since that movie debuted, Forrest Gump.
What?
30 years.
What were you doing in 1994?
Oh, God, where was I? 1994. I was in Fort Riley, Kansas.
No, that's where you were. What were you doing?
Oh, I was 11 Bravo. I was a staff sergeant in the Army, and I was in 116 Infantry.
Now you make me really feel old. You know what I was doing in 1994?
What?
I was an assignments officer at Human Resources Command. I was a captain.
Captain.
Yeah.
Cappy.
Yep. Good old Cap.
So why do you think, let's go back to Forrest Gump. Why is it that every time it comes on, it's like the first time you watched it? Why is it a timeless
I don't know.
movie? Why-
It's just some movies are like that, like
Yeah.
The Wizard of Oz.
Oh, good one. Good one. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Les, the reason why we're talking about all this Forrest Gump stuff is we actually have Lieutenant Dan himself on the show today, Mr. Gary Sinise.
What?
I actually know our guest today personally. He traveled to Afghanistan with me,
Yeah.
but he is a gentleman, a father, an actor, a singer, a musician, and a good friend.
Mm-hmm.
Gary, welcome to Army Matters.
Gary, welcome, brother.
Hey, thank you, gents. I've been looking forward to it. Thank you.
So, Gary, I'd like to start off by talking about something that's near and dear to your heart, and that's music. So, can you tell us about the most influential band of all time, the Beach Dwellers?
Yeah, who are those guys?
You've been reading up.
We do our research.
This is back in the 60s. I'm dating myself here. Just turned 69 years old. And back in the 60s, I think I was about 9 or 10, and my parents got me a guitar.
Mm-hmm.
And I started listening to the Beach Boys.
Yeah.
And they had a record. My first record that I got, Beach Boy record, was a live record where they were playing all their original hits like I Get Around and Fun, Fun, Fun and Little Old Lady from Pasadena, all these songs. And I just loved them. I didn't know how to play guitar yet. My parents got it, but I didn't know how to play. And there were some other kids in the neighborhood that had some guitars, and they didn't know how to play either. So what we would do is we would turn on the record player, turn up the speakers in somebody's living room, and we would lip sync to the Beach Boys tunes, and we called ourselves the Beach Dwellers. And it's how I got started in music, really, by listening to them. Then eventually took some guitar lessons and learned how to play the thing. But that's how I got started, really, just lip syncing to the Beach Boys.
So I got to ask, do you keep in touch with any of the original Beach Dwellers to this day?
The original Beach Dwellers? Well, no. I'm not sure those other Beach Dwellers learned how to play, but I'm hooked up with some other guys that, one guy played drums and another guy played guitar. And we had started. My first real band, I think, that I can remember was about 6th grade, where we actually played.
So, Gary, I have one more musical question for you. Do you remember any of the lyrics from West Side Story? And please tell our listeners why I'm asking you that question.
America from West Side Story. Yes. I like to be in America. Everything free in America, I think, is one of the lines. It's not so free, but okay, you're taking me back to where I actually got into acting. I was a freshman at Glenbard West High School, and my girlfriend at the time, her brother was in this school musical, and it was West Side Story. So I went to see it with her, and it looked like they were having fun up there. It's the Jets and the Sharks, and they rumble and they fight, and there's dances, and it's a great musical, really great. Leonard Bernstein wrote the music. I mean, just superb. And I really thought it looked like fun. And then as things would turn out, I ended up going to Highland Park High School as a sophomore. And wouldn't you know it, the spring musical was going to be West Side Story. And I remember standing around this hallway with my band members looking pretty scruffy and pretty raggedy. And the drama teacher walked down the hall and she told us we looked like gang members and we should come audition for West Side Story after school. So I just followed the girls in, and they were pretty, and I followed them in, and I just did what they told me and read the script, and I got in the play. And that really changed so much for me. I mean, getting in that play as a high school kid who was struggling and really having problems academically, all of a sudden I found this thing that I fell in love with, and I ended up being good at it. I just wanted to be in every play that I could do, and so I auditioned for everything I could. By the end of my senior year, I was one of the top drama students. And so I really found something that I connected to that I could do and ended up making a living at it. A lot of us don't find those, that life's work that early on, but I did. I found this acting thing and I just wanted to do it. Ended up starting a theater company called Steppenwolf as soon as I got out of high school. We just kept doing it and I ended up in the movies.
Now, from there, you went on to be a top actor and then a director in a theater company, one of the most successful ones in all of Chicago. Can you tell us a little bit more about Steppenwolf?
I knew what I wanted to do. I wanted to continue doing it, but I knew I wasn't going to go to college. So I ended up starting a theater company with some of the kids. And, we didn't have any money. We were just kids doing plays. And now it's 50 years old. It's a gigantic multi-million-dollar complex on the north side of Chicago with restaurants, and there's bars in there. There's classrooms. There's 3 theaters. It's just a multi-million-dollar Chicago institution, all started by, some kids who just wanted to do plays. It's really a great American theater story, but it's just a great American story when you think of what our country offers us the opportunity to do if we just work hard and we're passionate about it.
Now, Gary, after a successful career in the theater and film industry, you received a little script called Forrest Gump. Why do you think Lieutenant Dan is such an important character in film history?
My wife has 2 brothers who served in Vietnam. One, a very highly regarded Fort Leavenworth Hall of Famer, Lieutenant Colonel Boyd McCanna Harris. You guys remember Be No Do?
Oh, yes.
Right? So that's my brother-in-law.
Oh, wow.
He wrote that leadership manual, FM 22-100, and Be No Do was his leadership instruction there that is still, I think, taught at West Point. When I met him, he was really just, I'd never met anybody so polished and so put together as my wife's brother, Mac. Her other brother, the younger of the 2, served as a helicopter pilot in Vietnam. So they got my attention when I really met them.
Okay.
And I started thinking a lot about, what I was doing during Vietnam when I was in high school. And they were over in the jungle fighting, and then they come back to a divided nation. They had to, take the uniform off and hide and all that stuff that we know that was terrible for our Vietnam veterans. And I learned quite a bit from them. So I wanted to do something in the early 80s to support our Vietnam veterans. And I actually found a piece of material that I could direct that was a story written by Vietnam veterans, told their stories. It led me to an association with all kinds of local Vietnam veterans groups in the 80s. I helped to build a memorial in Lansing, Illinois, raise the money for that. And then along comes the 90s, right?
Okay.
And along comes Forrest Gump. I auditioned for it. I got the part. But Lieutenant Dan was just a great character. It's a wonderful story of a Vietnam veteran that hadn't been told up to that point. If you go back and you look at the Vietnam-focused stories that were being told in the movie business, you can think of several of them. Apocalypse Now, you can think of The Deer Hunter, Platoon, you can Coming Home. You look at all those films, and what happens to the Vietnam veteran at the end of those films? You just don't know if they're going to be okay, right? They're Coming Home. Bruce Dern takes off his uniform, jumps in the ocean and starts swimming, and that's it. He's not coming back.
Mm-hmm.
But along comes Lieutenant Dan. It's the story of the Vietnam veteran who was able to come home, process his post-traumatic stress, his isolation. He deals with alcohol abuse. He deals with all those things. But what happens at the end of that story is that Lieutenant Dan, he's got new legs and he's standing up and he's moving on. He's a wealthy, successful businessman who has processed his war years and was able to move beyond them. I say the story of Lieutenant Dan is a story that we want for every single wounded hero that comes back from battle.
Yeah.
We want them standing up, moving on, able to process their war years, move beyond them, and be okay.
Can you tell us a little bit about the research and prep you did prior to the start of the film?
I prepared for the soldier part by going out and doing boot camps, and the boot camp was very, very positive. We did the boot camp for about And it was training in the woods and living in the woods. And we were out in South Carolina. It's bugs and snakes. And we went out to Paris Island while we were there, fired some weapons out there, watched the youngsters get their butts kicked out there a bit, and lived out in the woods with the platoon. So I got to become the lieutenant. By the time we finished our boot camp, I was the lieutenant for sure. And then the next day, after we finished, or within a couple of days, we got to recover a little bit from the boot camp, nurse the snake bites and the mosquito bites.
Right.
And then we marched in with the platoon into our first scene that we shot with the platoon, which is the platoon walking down the road.
Amazing.
I don't know if you remember. Forrest Gump goes, Lieutenant Dan, he was always telling everybody to get down and shut up. And then Lieutenant Dan says, get down, shut up. And it's a great scene because you really establish Lieutenant Dan as the boss, right? He's the leader. Everybody's following him.
Right.
He's strong. But then there was the wounded veteran part that I had to really look into.
Yeah.
One of the things I remember doing, was reading Lewis Puller's book called Fortunate Son.
Okay.
And Lewis Puller, of course, he was the son of Chesty Puller. And Chesty, of course, most decorated Marine ever or something like that. I mean, just extraordinary career there. And Lewis was his son who went to Vietnam and got blown up and lost his legs and an arm, and he was just really banged up, really struggled.
Mm-hmm.
And he wrote a book about his life, about being the son of the most decorated Marine colonel ever, and what that was like to look up at his father when he's laying in this hospital bed and see his father crying.
Yeah,
it's a beautiful book, and it really prepared me for the wounded soldier that I was to play in Forrest Gump. I talked to other wounded Vietnam veterans and people dealing with amputations just to figure out, how I was going to portray that accurately. And then Bob Zemeckis came up with the ideas to take my legs off in the computer. Then a lot of that preparation was very, very valuable to me to get ready to play the part.
Join AUSA, the Army's premier professional association and host of the largest land power exposition in the United States. AUSA is open to everyone, including all ranks and components. So whether you have a relationship with the U.S. Army or simply want to honor those who serve, you can learn more at ausa.org/join.
Well, Gary, I'll tell you, most of the world knows you as an actor and a musician, but there's a community in the military that knows you as a person that supports us truly and wholly. And you created your own foundation. I want the listeners to hear a little bit about that. The Gary Sinise Foundation that has done incredible things, helped build 90 adaptable houses, 15,000 other contributions, and just an endless list of things you've done. What gave you all the passion to get behind that foundation, Gary?
Yeah, Dan. Well, of course, what inspired me is the men and women who were serving, and I was seeing that, like I said, showing up makes a difference. But when I really started getting involved, I mean, like the 80s were kind of a seed being planted there with the support of the Vietnam veteran stuff. Then the 90s with Forrest Gump and Lieutenant Dan, and I got involved with the disabled American veterans in the 90s. Those years, those decades were kind of teeing up what would happen after September 11th, 2001, when we deployed to Afghanistan and Iraq, and people started getting hurt, and we started losing people and all that. I just found that I wanted to be a part of supporting. Again, having Vietnam veterans in my family, remembering what happened to them when they came home, just didn't want that to happen to you guys. So I thought, one way I could serve was volunteering for the USO and going out there. And as an actor, just showing up and shaking hands and taking pictures and having lunch and letting people know I cared about them. And doing that with the USO was a good thing. And then the USO started supporting my band, going out there and playing on military bases around And I remember that one of the first triple amputee I met at Walter Reed in 2003, and I was there on September 11th, 2003. I remember all this stuff like it was yesterday. He was from Micronesia, and his dad was there, and I think he may have been the first to lose 3 limbs. And then, of course, as time went on, there were more, and there were more, and then there were quadruple amputees, and there, multiple injuries. At one point, the hospital was so full, as we remember, they didn't even know where to put people, or it was not a good situation. There was just too much going on. But I was glad to be there, and I learned a lot from them. I learned a lot from their families, because you walk into a hospital room and somebody's unconscious in the bed, but the family's all standing around just waiting for him to wake up. And somebody like me walks in, and they look at me and they go, "Lieutenant Dan's here," and all of a sudden their day is brightened up, and then they start sharing the story of their wounded loved one laying in the bed. And those things impacted me greatly. And it really, I just wanted to come back more and more and more, because I could see what the simple act of just showing up means. I was supporting a lot of different military nonprofits back before I had my own. There's nothing that compares to showing up and wrapping your arms around somebody and just listening to them and talking to them. That means more than, the checks or anything.
Gary, then you got back to your musical roots and created one of my favorite bands of all time, the Lieutenant Dan Band, which has played for service members all over the world. Can you tell us a little bit about what the band has done?
We've played over 560 concerts now on military bases all over the world. I could see what showing up and playing for everybody was doing to lift these folks up. And quite often we'll go to bases where you got a lot of soldiers, a lot of Marines. They're deployed and their families are there, and they're just kind of going through the day. And along comes Lieutenant Dan and has a concert for them, and that can really help those families through. So those early ways of volunteering was very important and kind of just got my attention. And then I started volunteering to support a lot of different nonprofits beyond the USO.
I'll tell you what, I'm so glad that you did that. And I'll tell you, my listeners out there, when I was Sergeant of the Army, I could send a note to Gary, who was busy in his acting career and helping and volunteering and running his own foundation and doing music. And he would stop to take the time to do a Christmas shout out to the troops anytime I asked. It was amazing.
I'll still do that if you need me to.
Oh, I know.
Just make sure you just reach out anytime. I'm there for you.
Speaking of the band, Gary, we've heard many times about a certain sergeant in the Army that joined you on stage and demonstrated his tambourine skills. What can you tell us about that historical music event?
I did. Fort Belvoir, remember?
Well, it wasn't really memorable. So it's hard. I really have to search the memory bank to get that memory back. But
so Gary,
Dan,
I'll spike your memory. Remember, it was Chef Irvine, myself, and you on stage. And Chef Irvine were doing a push-up competition right before.
Oh, and that's the one.
Yeah. And then they handed me the tambourine to stay up on stage and play while you jammed out. Yeah.
Okay. Well, you better come to Fort Belvoir on the 23rd. I'll put you back up there with the tambourine, and we'll feature you.
Oh, let's do it.
Come on over to Fort Belvoir, guys, and have some fun over there. We bring the food out and we do the whole thing.
Now, speaking of music, we were all very saddened to hear the recent passing of your son, Mac, a fellow musician who passed away early at age 33. Can you tell us about how you and the family are dealing with this horrible, horrible grief?
Yeah, this has been, in my 69 years, there's never been a pain, or a sorrow like this. I've had plenty of them, like we all have, but losing a son and who fought cancer for 5.5 years, and I was like his battle buddy through all of that. That pain is unlike. There's nothing that compares. to it. We're going to be grieving for quite some time. And I think in some ways, all the broken families that I've met along the way in our military, our Gold Star families, the families of our wounded, families of fallen first responders, the people that I've tried to help over the years, and watching them persevere through those difficult moments and challenges. In some way, I was being prepared, and that was this diagnosis of cancer back in 2018, and two diagnoses. I mean, my wife was diagnosed a couple months before our son was. Thankfully, she is in remission after surgery and radiation and chemo and all that. Our son had an incurable cancer that is very, very rare called chordoma. And you can go to the Chordoma Foundation to learn about that. We started the campaign to help the Chordoma Foundation with research and development for new drugs, because there are no drugs to fight this. You can take the tumor out initially. It starts in the spine, and about 70% of the time, only about 300 cases per year in the U.S. You can take that tumor out and it's gone. It doesn't come back. 30% of the time, maybe 90 people in the U.S. per year, the cancer comes back, and then you're trying to fight it with drugs and radiation, and there are no drugs that have been reliably effective to fight that cancer. So we knew we were going uphill. We were fighting a battle that was really tough, but our son never wanted to quit. There were a few times he said, "I just don't want to go back to the hospital, Dad." And then we would get through that, and he would get back on track a bit, just doing his treatment and living his life. He was unfortunately paralyzed and ended up in a hospital bed. I'm a Chicago Cub fan. We were watching the Cubs all summer, and he was enjoying himself and then going to treatment. And he was resilient and persevered, as so many of these families that I've met over the years have done.
So, Gary, one of the last things that Mac did was record an album. And one of the songs on that was called Arctic Circles. Can you tell us more about the experience of seeing Mac do that in his final months?
Yeah, he was in a composition class at college at USC. And, he had to write certain things for composition class. And he wrote that. And just this morning, I was crying in the chair, listening to the original recordings that he made of Arctic Circles when he was first writing it. And then he put it away. And then early 2023, he said, "Dad, I've got this old piece of music. Do you think your band members would help me kind of flesh it out and sort it out?" So he started working on it. And by July, they were in the studio recording it. And so when you go to the YouTube channel, it's all videos of the music. Arctic Circles is there. There's a video of Shenandoah, the great American classic. It's tremendous. And Mac couldn't play drums anymore because he's paralyzed, and he could barely, one of his arms was crippled. But his mom suggested he get a harmonica, so he started teaching himself harmonica. And I gave him a video of Medal of Honor recipient Sammy Davis, who tells a story about playing the harmonica in Vietnam. His mom sent him a harmonica, and his sergeant came over to him one night, and he's in the trench, and it's raining, and he's down in the hole and stuff, and he's playing the harmonica, and the sergeant says, "Can you play Shenandoah?" And Sammy said, "No." And so he said, "Well, learn Shenandoah." I've done multiple events with him. He's a good friend. And Mac learned it. And then when we were going into the studio to record Arctic Circles, I said, "You're going to have a string section there. Have Oliver, his writing partner, do an arrangement to back you up on harmonica." And he did this beautiful arrangement. Mac plays our harmonica, and it's beautiful. I'm so proud of Mac for what he did in the final months of his life. He achieved some greatness. I mean, it's not just like, "This is my son's music, go listen to it." Everyone who goes to listen to that is knocked out by how beautiful it is. And it's very, very moving. It's been very, very helpful to our family to watch the nation kind of embrace our son in this way.
Gary, thanks for sharing that. The music is inspiring. And thanks for everything you've done over the years for us and for our service members. You know, Lieutenant Dan has been an inspiration for many, but the impact that you've made, Gary, throughout your life is even more powerful. Thank you.
So great to be here, Dan. Thank you. It's good to see you.
We appreciate you so much.
Les, thank you. Thanks for having me.
We recently sat down with 98-year-old Staff Sergeant Jack Moran, who enlisted in the Army at the age of 17 and went over to fight in Europe in 1944. In his first 15 seconds of combat, Sergeant Moran witnessed 7 fellow soldiers die, but he went on to fight in the Battle of the Bulge, chased Nazis through Germany, and helped to liberate the Buchenwald concentration camp. Our interview with Sergeant Moran will be aired at a later date, but during our sit-down with him, we asked if he'd like to give a shout-out to anyone in the Army family. This was his answer.
In Washington, there's a Major, Jake Grubb, G-R-U-B. He's aide-de-camp to the Secretary of the Army, and I'd like to say hello to Jake. Young lady named Jill just graduated from VMI, and she's a second lieutenant now, and Tommy Langston, who was my squad leader during the war, I'm very close to the Langston family. Young Thomas Langston is now a junior. He's going to be a senior this fall at VMI. I'm very proud of him. I wear a wristband, which was devoted to Sergeant Thomas Langston, was showing the day he died, and etc.
If you'd like to give a shout out to someone in the Army family, leave us a voicemail at 703-236-2914 or email a voice note to podcast@ausa.org.
To all our listeners, thanks for joining us. Army Matters is brought to you by the Association of the United States Army, the U.S. Army's professional association, member-supported, Army-connected. Visit us at AUSA.org for more information or to become a member. Your membership helps AUSA continue to carry out its mission, educate, inform, and connect with the total Army, our industry partners, and supporters of a strong national defense. Today's episode was hosted by Lieutenant General Retired Les Smith and SMA Retired Dan Dailey, and anchor hosted by Carrie Barrow-Heckes. Anthony Del Call is the producer and writer, and Andy Bosnack is the supervising sound editor. Ellen Toner is the content editor. Unzinga Curry is the executive producer, and the senior producers are Carrie Barrow-Heckes and LaSharon Duncan. Be sure to subscribe to Army Matters wherever you get your podcasts, and please leave a review. As you know, we love seeing stars in the Army, especially if it comes in the form of a 5-star review. AUSA's Army Matters podcast can also be heard on Reach Across America Radio on Monday at 8 p.m. Eastern, on the iHeartRadio app, the Odyssey app, and the TuneIn app with the search of the word Reef. AUSA's Army Matters podcast primary purpose is to entertain. The podcast does not constitute advice or services. While guests are invited to listen, listeners, please note that you're not being provided professional advice from the podcast or the guest. The views and opinions of our guests do not necessarily reflect the views of AUSA. For questions or to provide topic recommendations, email us at podcast@ausa.org. I'm LaSharon Duncan. Hope you have a great Army Day. Hooah!